One of the hardest truths to accept when dealing with an avoidant person is that the more available you become, the less value they often place on your presence. That sounds unfair because it seems to contradict everything we've been taught about love. Most people believe that if you care deeply, communicate openly, and consistently show up for someone, they will naturally appreciate you more. In healthy relationships, that's often true. But avoidant psychology operates according to a very different set of emotional rules. An avoidant is not necessarily someone who doesn't care. In many cases, they care deeply. The problem is that emotional closeness triggers discomfort. Intimacy creates pressure. Dependence feels threatening. The closer someone gets, the more vulnerable they feel, and vulnerability is exactly what they have spent years trying to avoid. Because of this, they often develop a strange relationship with availability. When they know someone is always there, always understanding, always forgiving, and always willing to wait, they stop experiencing that person's value in a conscious way. Human beings are wired to notice what can be lost. We become aware of importance when something is no longer guaranteed. For an avoidant, certainty often creates emotional blindness. Think about it. If every time they pull away, you chase them, what lesson are they learning? If every time they ignore your needs, you lower your standards, what message are you sending? If every time they create distance, you work harder to maintain the connection, what incentive do they have to change? Without realizing it, many people train avoidance to expect unconditional access without reciprocal effort. This is where a crucial distinction must be made between love and respect. Love is an emotional experience. Respect is a recognition of value. Someone can care about you and still fail to respect your boundaries. Someone can miss you and still take you for granted. Someone can enjoy your presence and still believe, consciously or unconsciously, that you'll always remain available no matter how they behave. Respect emerges when people understand that your time, energy, and emotional investment are valuable. It develops when your presence is a choice rather than a guarantee. The irony is that many people sacrifice respect in pursuit of love. They think that by giving more, tolerating more, and accepting less, they are proving their devotion. But what they are actually proving is that their standards are flexible. And when standards become flexible, value often decreases. Psychologically, avoidants are highly sensitive to pressure, but they are also highly sensitive to loss. While they may run from emotional demands, they are forced to pay attention when something meaningful begins to disappear. This doesn't mean they are malicious. It doesn't mean they are playing games. It simply means their awareness often activates through absence rather than presence. That is why so many people find themselves trapped in an exhausting cycle. The more they give, the less they receive. The more available they become, the less appreciated they feel. The harder they try to secure the relationship, the more distant the avoidant becomes. And eventually they start asking the wrong question. They ask, how do I make them see my value? But value is rarely communicated through words. It is communicated through behavior. It is communicated through standards. It is communicated through the willingness to protect your self-respect, even when emotions are pulling you in the opposite direction. An avoidant often does not fully recognize your importance while your presence feels permanent. The certainty of your availability allows them to focus on their fears instead of your value. They become accustomed to your effort. They normalize your sacrifices. They stop seeing what is right in front of them because they assume it will always be there. The moment you understand this, everything changes. You stop trying to convince people to appreciate you. You stop performing for validation. You stop measuring your worth through someone else's attention. Because the truth is simple. People rarely respect what they believe they can never lose. And the moment you stop making yourself endlessly available is the moment your value becomes impossible to ignore. Once you understand why avoidants often stop valuing what is constantly available, the next thing you have to confront is the mistake that keeps most people trapped for months, sometimes years. It's the instinctive reaction almost everyone has when an avoidant starts pulling away. When distance appears, most people move closer. When communication decreases, they send more messages. When affection fades, they try harder to earn it. It feels logical. It feels loving. It feels like the responsible thing to do. After all, if something important is slipping away, shouldn't you fight for it? But this is exactly where the trap begins. The problem is that human beings often respond to emotional uncertainty by increasing effort. We believe that if we can just explain ourselves better, love harder, be more patient, or prove our commitment one more time, the other person will finally understand our value. Yet with an avoidant, this strategy frequently produces the opposite result. The more they withdraw, the more attention they receive. The more inconsistent they become, the more understanding they are given. The less effort they invest, the harder someone else works to compensate. Without realizing it, the entire relationship becomes organized around their avoidance. Think about the psychological message being communicated. Every time they create distance, and you immediately rush to close the gap, they learn that distance gives them control. Every time they fail to meet your needs and you lower your expectations, they learn that accountability is optional. Every time they pull away and you chase harder, they learn that your presence is guaranteed. And guaranteed things are rarely respected. What makes this especially dangerous is that many people confuse pursuit with love. They tell themselves they are being loyal, committed, and understanding. In reality, they are often abandoning themselves. There is a profound difference between fighting for a relationship and fighting against reality. A healthy relationship requires two people moving toward each other. An unhealthy dynamic develops when one person is constantly moving while the other remains stationary or continues moving away. At that point, your effort is no longer building connection. It is simply compensating for its absence. Philosophically, this is where self-respect enters the conversation. Every action teaches people how to treat us, not through words, but through repeated patterns. If your behavior consistently communicates, "I will stay no matter how little effort you give," eventually, people believe you. Not because they are cruel, but because humans adapt to the standards they are shown. This is why pleading rarely works. Convincing rarely works. Endless explanations rarely work. You cannot negotiate genuine desire. You cannot argue someone into emotional availability. And you cannot create respect by sacrificing your own dignity. The more desperately someone tries to hold on to an avoidant, the more they often communicate fear. Fear of loss. Fear of being alone. Fear of not being enough. And unfortunately, fear has a way of shrinking personal power. Confidence attracts respect because confidence signals choice. Desperation repels respect because desperation signals dependence. That doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you become cold or indifferent. It means you stop making your emotional well-being dependent on someone else's willingness to stay. Because the moment you begin chasing someone who is running, you have already surrendered the very thing you're trying to preserve. Never forget this. The harder you chase your value through another person, the further you move away from your own. The moment you stop chasing, something remarkable begins to happen. At first, it doesn't feel powerful. In fact, it often feels uncomfortable. Because when you've spent weeks, months, or even years focusing on another person's behavior, shifting that attention back to yourself can feel unfamiliar. Many people mistake this discomfort for loss, but what they are actually experiencing is the process of reclaiming themselves. This is where emotional detachment becomes essential. Now, detachment is one of the most misunderstood concepts in relationships. People hear the word and assume it means becoming cold, uncaring, or emotionally unavailable. That's not what we're talking about. Genuine detachment is not the absence of love. It is the absence of dependence. You can care deeply about someone without making them responsible for your peace of mind. You can love someone without sacrificing your identity. You can want a relationship without needing one to validate your worth. That distinction changes everything. When people become emotionally attached to outcomes, they unknowingly surrender their power. Their mood depends on a text message. Their confidence depends on another person's attention. Their sense of value rises and falls based on someone else's behavior. In that state, they are no longer living from their own center. They are living in reaction, and reaction is the opposite of freedom. One of the deepest philosophical truths about human relationships is that attachment creates suffering when it becomes possession. The moment you believe your happiness can only exist if a specific person behaves a specific way, you place your emotional life in a cage. Avoidants often sense this dynamic, even when nobody says it aloud. When someone becomes excessively focused on keeping them, they feel pressure. When someone appears emotionally dependent on their presence, they feel responsible for emotions they cannot comfortably manage. As a result, they often create even more distance. Ironically, the thing people think will bring an avoidant closer often pushes them further away. This is why reclaiming your value begins with reclaiming your attention. Instead of asking, "Why aren't they choosing me?" you begin asking, "Am I choosing myself?" Instead of monitoring their effort, you evaluate your own standards. Instead of obsessing over their next move, you invest in your growth, your health, your purpose, your friendships, and your future. Something powerful happens when your life stops revolving around a single person. Your energy changes. Your confidence changes. Your presence changes. Not because you're pretending to be strong, because you're becoming strong. And here's what many people don't realize. Emotional independence is attractive not because it creates mystery, but because it demonstrates self-respect. It communicates that your life has meaning beyond the relationship. It shows that your identity cannot be reduced to whether someone stays or leaves. This is not a strategy to make an avoidant come back. It's a strategy to make sure you never abandon yourself again. And when that shift occurs, something extraordinary happens. Whether the avoidant notices or not becomes less important. Whether they return or not becomes less important. Because your focus is no longer centered on controlling another person's choices. It's centered on mastering your own. That is the moment your power returns. Not when they change, not when they call, not when they finally understand your worth, but when you remember that your value was never theirs to define in the first place. Once you've reclaimed your emotional center, the next challenge is turning that internal shift into action. This is where many people struggle. They understand that they need to stop chasing. They understand that they need stronger boundaries. But when the moment arrives to actually walk away, fear takes over. Why? Because walking away forces you to confront uncertainty. As long as you remain in the cycle, there is always hope that tomorrow will be different. Maybe they'll text. Maybe they'll open up. Maybe they'll finally realize what you mean to them. Remaining available allows you to stay connected to possibility. Walking away requires you to let go of the illusion of control. And that's why it feels so difficult. Most people imagine walking away as a dramatic event. They picture emotional speeches, long explanations, arguments, ultimatums, and final conversations designed to make the other person understand exactly what they've just done wrong. But in reality, the strongest departures are often the quietest. The purpose of walking away is not to punish someone. The purpose is not to create guilt. The purpose is not to force a reaction. The purpose is to align your actions with your values. That distinction matters. When people walk away hoping to manipulate an outcome, they remain emotionally attached. Their focus is still on controlling another person's response. But when someone walks away because they genuinely recognize that the relationship is no longer serving their well-being, something entirely different happens. Their decision comes from self-respect rather than strategy. This is why clear boundaries are so powerful. A boundary is not a threat. A boundary is not an attempt to change someone. A boundary is simply a statement about what you will and will not participate in. Many people spend enormous amounts of energy trying to convince avoidants to become different. They explain their needs repeatedly. They negotiate. They compromise. They wait. And while communication is important, there comes a point where additional conversations stop creating clarity and start creating dependency. At some stage, words lose their effectiveness. Behavior becomes the message. If someone consistently shows you that they cannot meet you where you are, continuing to argue with reality only creates suffering. Reality does not change because we dislike it. Maturity begins when we stop fighting what is and start responding to it intelligently. This is why calmness is so important when walking away. Anger often hides attachment. Bitterness often hides disappointment. The desire to make someone regret losing you often reveals that part of you is still seeking validation from them. True strength doesn't require revenge. True strength doesn't require dramatic exits. True strength allows you to acknowledge the truth without becoming consumed by it. You simply recognize that your standards matter. You recognize that your needs matter. You recognize that your emotional well-being deserves protection. And then you act accordingly. For some people, walking away means ending the relationship completely. For others, it means reducing access, creating distance, and refusing to continue unhealthy patterns. The specific action matters less than the underlying principle. The principle is consistency, because nothing destroys a boundary faster than repeatedly abandoning it. If you say you need change, but continue accepting the same behavior, your actions contradict your words. And people always believe actions more than words. This is why silence can sometimes be more powerful than explanation. Not because silence is a weapon, but because silence allows reality to speak for itself. You no longer need to convince someone that you're hurt. You no longer need to argue for your worth. You no longer need to negotiate basic respect. Your absence communicates what endless conversations never could. And here's the paradox that surprises many people. The moment you stop trying to force understanding is often the moment your message becomes clearest, not because you've become louder, but because you've become congruent. Your behavior finally matches your values. That's what walking away the right way truly means. It means leaving behind the need to persuade, prove, or perform. It means trusting yourself enough to choose dignity over uncertainty, standards over fear, and self-respect over emotional dependency. Because the most powerful goodbye is not the one spoken with anger. It is the one spoken through action and never taken back. One of the questions people ask most often after walking away is, what happens inside an avoidance mind now? The answer is more nuanced than most people expect. Many imagine that the avoidant immediately panics, regrets everything, and comes running back. Sometimes that happens, but often the process is slower, more complex, and deeply tied to how avoidant psychology works. The first thing that many avoidants experience is relief. That can be difficult to hear, especially if you've just made a painful decision. But it makes sense when you understand their internal world. Emotional closeness often feels overwhelming to them. Expectations, vulnerability, and the possibility of dependence can create anxiety. So when distance suddenly appears, part of them feels a release from that pressure. This is why many avoidants don't immediately chase after someone who leaves. In the early stage, they may throw themselves into work, hobbies, social activities, or distractions. From the outside, it can look as if they are unaffected. But relief is not the end of the story. It is only the beginning. As time passes, something changes. The certainty that you are always available disappears. Human psychology is highly sensitive to loss. When something becomes uncertain, the mind begins to reevaluate it. The avoidant who once focused primarily on the discomfort of closeness may now begin noticing the comfort, support, and stability that your presence provided. This is often the stage of curiosity. They start wondering what you're doing. They notice your absence in moments that used to include you. They compare current experiences to the relationship they had with you. And because you are no longer constantly pursuing them, they are forced to think rather than react. That distinction is important. When someone is always chasing an avoidant, the avoidant rarely has to confront the possibility of losing them. Your attention keeps the connection alive, even when they contribute little. But once that attention is removed, the emotional equation changes. For the first time, they may experience the relationship from the perspective of scarcity rather than abundance. Then comes confusion. Many avoidants are skilled at suppressing uncomfortable emotions, but suppression is not the same as resolution. The feelings they avoided during the relationship do not necessarily disappear. They often remain beneath the surface until distance creates enough space for reflection. This is why some avoidants begin reaching out weeks or months later. They are not always reacting to loneliness. Sometimes they are finally processing emotions they were unable to face when the relationship was active. Without the immediate pressure of intimacy, they can examine the connection more objectively. However, it is important not to romanticize this process. Not every avoidant returns. Not every avoidant changes. And even when someone comes back, a return is not automatically evidence of growth. Genuine change requires self-awareness, accountability, and a willingness to develop healthier relationship patterns. A temporary wave of nostalgia is not the same thing as emotional transformation. The deeper lesson is that your decision to walk away creates conditions for truth. When constant access disappears, both people are forced to confront reality. You see whether they are willing to make meaningful effort. They see what life feels like without your presence. The relationship can no longer survive on assumption, convenience, or emotional inertia. Philosophically, this is why absence has such power. Presence can become invisible when it is guaranteed. Absence reveals what was hidden. It exposes habits, dependencies, appreciation, and regret. It turns unconscious patterns into conscious experiences. And perhaps the most important thing to remember is this: Their realization is not something you can control. You cannot force an avoidant to miss you, reflect on the relationship, or recognize your value. What you can control is whether you continue sacrificing yourself while waiting for that realization to occur. Because the moment you walk away with integrity, the burden of awakening shifts from your shoulders to theirs. And if they are ever going to understand your value, they must discover it in the silence you leave behind. As we reach the final part of this conversation, we arrive at the lesson that ties everything together. Because after all the analysis of avoidant psychology, after all the discussion about boundaries, detachment, and walking away, there is one question that remains. What if they never come back? For many people, that question sits quietly beneath everything else. It is the fear that drives the chasing. It is the fear that makes them tolerate behavior they know is unhealthy. It is the fear that keeps them waiting long after the relationship has stopped meeting their needs. And yet, the answer to that question reveals the entire purpose of this journey. If they come back, you win. If they don't come back, you still win. Not because rejection feels good, not because loss is easy, but because the real victory was never about controlling another person's decision. The real victory was about reclaiming yourself. For too long, many people unknowingly place their lives on hold while waiting for someone else to choose them. They postpone their happiness. They postpone their growth. They postpone their peace of mind. Everything becomes dependent on a future outcome they cannot control. But life does not reward waiting. Life rewards participation. The moment you stop organizing your world around someone else's uncertainty, you create space for something extraordinary. You create space for your own evolution. You begin investing in yourself again. You strengthen friendships that may have been neglected. You reconnect with goals and ambitions that existed before the relationship. You develop confidence that comes from action rather than validation. And little by little, you discover something powerful. The energy you were using to chase another person can be used to build a better version of yourself. This is where many people experience a profound shift. At first, they walk away hoping the avoidant will notice. Then they walk away hoping the avoidant will return. Eventually, if they continue growing, they reach a point where their focus changes completely. Now they are asking different questions. How can I become stronger? How can I become wiser? How can I create a life so meaningful that it no longer depends on someone else's approval? Those questions lead to freedom, because freedom is not the absence of desire. Freedom is the absence of dependence. You can still care. You can still love. You can still be open to reconciliation. But you no longer need those things in order to feel whole. And that changes the nature of every future relationship. If the avoidant returns, you are no longer the person who once accepted breadcrumbs in exchange for hope. You are no longer operating from fear of loss. You now have standards. You have boundaries. You understand your worth, which means any future connection must be built on mutual effort rather than one-sided sacrifice. And if they do not return, your life continues moving forward. You meet new people. You discover new opportunities. You create experiences that remind you how large the world truly is. Most importantly, you develop a relationship with yourself that cannot be taken away by another person's choices. That is the hidden gift in all of this. People often believe that power comes from being chosen, but real power comes from choosing yourself. Being chosen can disappear overnight. Self-respect can remain for a lifetime. Being desired by someone else is uncertain. Knowing your own value is stable. Receiving love from another person is wonderful. But becoming the source of your own confidence changes everything. In the end, avoidant psychology is not really the central lesson here. The deeper lesson is about identity. It is about refusing to lose yourself while trying to keep someone else. It is about recognizing that no relationship is worth the cost of your dignity, your peace, or your self-respect. Because when you finally stop chasing what refuses to stay, you create space for what truly belongs in your life. And that is the ultimate paradox. The moment you stop needing them to choose you is the moment you realize you were never waiting for their return. You were waiting to return to yourself. And once you do, you never have to chase your value again. So, as we bring this conversation to a close, remember the central truth behind everything we've discussed. Avoidants do not truly learn your value when you are constantly proving it. They learn your value when they are forced to experience your absence, your boundaries, and your willingness to walk away from what no longer honors your worth. For too long, you may have believed that love meant holding on tighter, trying harder, and sacrificing more. But real strength is not found in endless pursuit. Real strength is found in knowing when to stop chasing, when to stand firm, and when to choose self-respect over uncertainty. The moment you stop begging for what should be freely given, you change the entire dynamic. You stop operating from fear and start operating from confidence. You stop seeking validation and start recognizing your own value. And whether the avoidant comes back or not becomes far less important than the person you become in the process. Because this was never just about them. It was about you. It was about reclaiming your power. It was about remembering that your worth does not increase when someone finally notices it. And it does not decrease when someone fails to appreciate it. If they return with genuine growth, accountability, and respect, you'll be strong enough to recognize the difference between real change and temporary emotion. And if they don't return, you'll be even stronger, because your process will build a life that no longer depends on someone else's ability to see your value. At the end of the day, the people who command the most respect are not the ones who chase endlessly. They are the ones who know their worth, honor their boundaries, and have the courage to walk away when necessary. Because the moment you stop asking, how do I make them choose me, and start asking, am I choosing myself, everything changes. And that is the moment your life truly begins.